Thank you both, Dr. Stotsky and Jamie Gass, for some really terrific information. There's a couple of more things that I want to mention. In my role as an activist, I'm an area director on one of 12 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And one of the things that keeps occurring over and over again is I get 1,000 questions in a month about opting out. What can we do? I get a lot of questions about the health circulars that are going around. And this has become a real hot button. And just as Dr. Stotsky said, I'm going to follow on her lead here. Your children do not need to participate in those. You can send a letter to your school principal, just a short note. I do not want my child to participate in health surveys. There's no mandatoriness about that. So please make sure that you find out what's on these health surveys and opt out of them. Now the last thing, which neither Jamie nor Dr. Stotsky talked much about, is data mining. And I know I have one friend in the audience who's really angry about data mining. And I'm sure that if parents understood what's actually happening with the data mining, you would be extremely alarmed. I know my husband and I, and he's in the audience tonight, we had a credit card. And one of us must have used it at either Home Depot or Target or perhaps both. And our credit card company sent us new credit cards because their data had been breached. There's a company that was hired by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the state of Ohio to manage data. That company went bankrupt this week. It is bankrupt. What's going to happen to that data? And every single parent in this room, your kid's data is out there. There's no escaping it. If they have a student ID, and they all do, that data is out there, and this is connected to your children. So this is a grave concern for parents right now, and I don't have answers. I really, truly do not have answers. So if there's any of you in the audience tonight that has a little bit of information about this kind of stuff and you're willing to share, I'm inviting you to make a friend of me on Facebook, Cindy Curcio, C-I-N-D-Y, C-U-R-C-I-O. Friend me on Facebook, or join Stop Common Core Massachusetts, spelled out Massachusetts. Join that organization and start sharing information because we have power in numbers. A lot of us have been working solo for a long time. We have a group now, and I think it's time for everybody to start stepping up and helping each other. And the other final piece of information that I'd like to give you is that I was at the State House in Boston. We had a lobbying event there, and some people that are here tonight were there. And in that event, I talked with numerous state representatives, and the state representatives have all said the same thing in this particular instance. There's a lot of petitions circulating, and petitions go out to the public, you know, sign this, let your state representative know, let your senator know, etc. They don't pay attention to those things. They get inundated with all kinds of, you know, form letters created by different groups. These are not individualized. And what they have requested is if you're upset about something, they are listening. We think that our governing people are not listening. They are listening. I saw it myself at the State House that day. I watched as 3 state representatives congratulated my grandson on a 10-minute speech that he was terrified to give. And they are paying attention. And so if you have anything that you would like to see them handle, then please, please, send them an email. They'll accept your personal email. Email the governor, email your representatives, anything that you're concerned about. But right now, those hot buttons are the data breaching and the data collection. The data collection still goes on. Your kids sign onto a computer in school, their data is being collected. And what's going to happen to it? We have laws that protect us for this. Except that the laws don't apply with PARCC. And this is a concern. So please make sure you make contact with your representatives. Now, Jane, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was going to, I didn't really mention my remarks, and so the data collection really kind of runs parallel to Common Core. It's not in the standards themselves, but it really is an outlook of the architects of Common Core. Because as I mentioned, the outlook or the governing sort of philosophy behind K-12 education for centuries is that it's for developing citizens, educating children for citizenship. And the outlook really of Common Core is that of workforce development. That's why they're called college and career-ready standards. They, Achieving, which runs the PARCC testing, the Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, these DC-based lobby groups that are big advocates of Common Core. It's really the same group of people that were pushing for this back in the early 1990s. And they've always had a big preference for school to work. And on the face of that, it sounds, well, what's wrong with that? Preparing kids for work is okay. But it's just, the difference, of course, is that we have vocational technical schools. Massachusetts has great vocational technical schools. We've seen enormous academic gains in the last 10, 15 years alone. But the difference here is that this is workforce development for kids that don't pick it, right? That's the difference between a voc tech school that students or children pick and ones that use regular comprehensive high schools is that people are picking. So the thing is to just understand this is the whole outlook of Common Core is more for workforce development, and the idea behind it is that in order to kind of direct kids in what careers they're going to go and have, the way they do it, frankly, in a lot of the countries in Europe, where they take a test, and if they don't pass that test, then they're not going to go to higher education. That really is the outlook behind the Common Core. And so in order to have that outlook, you have to have national standards, you have to have a national test, you have to have a national curriculum, and the PARCC testing group has been funded by the U.S. Department of Education to develop a national curriculum. I mean, it's sort of educational paint by numbers. And then you have to collect all the student identifiable data. A lot of it is not academic. So Massachusetts became #1 in the country for internationally competitive, not by collecting lots of data on its students, but improving the quality of the standards and having some minimum MCAS data that teachers and principals can use to drive decision making. That is really completely different. They want to, on PARCC, they want to be able to share this information with the U.S. Department of Education, Department of Labor, etc. And kind of be, in a way, kind of picking winners and losers in the job, market too. And so we did a paper, about a year or so ago with a couple of lawyers. It's called Cogs in the Machine. You can go to the Pioneer website. You can do a Google search. It's a 80-page paper. It's like 500 footnotes. It maps out in a lot of detail. Frankly, as the father of 3-year-old and 8-year-old daughters, I mean, it's creepy things that they want to gather information on the kids about. It really has nothing to do with academics or improving student achievement. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is that you can, if you do a Google search for Jane Robbins, she was one of the co-authors of the paper and data collection, and then look at videos. There's a video that she's done. I think it's about 10 or 15 minutes. It's got tens of thousands of views, and it's actually a good summary of what it is that Cindy's talking about in terms of this workforce development data collection that runs parallel to Common Core. And it really was something that the state began to sign on to through Race to the Top, which is the federal grant program, which is Massachusetts, got into Common Core. So I can answer more of your questions, but I felt like it was important to just give you a little synopsis of what it is that she's talking about.
And I'm thrilled that you did, Jamie. Absolutely thrilled. Okay, 2 final things. I have a petition to start Common Core PARCC testing. There's only a few signatures on here, but I don't know if some of you are reluctant to sign it or not, but I'm going to pass it around the room. You can sign it or not sign it, and just pass it on to the next person, if you would, please. And then finally, we welcome your questions. We have half an hour left. And so I'm sure that Jamie or Dr. Stotsky can answer plenty of your questions.
It would be helpful if you could come to the mic individually.
I am just so loud anyway, so it's not an issue. Mary Ann Peterson, Gloucester, Massachusetts. I came to a recent event that Jamie did, the Cooner event up at Calhoun, and learned a little bit. But there's a question I just thought of tonight, and if we're breaking federal laws, why is there not a lawsuit against this? That's not my first question. Why can't we go after it from that perspective? And the second question is a little bit different, is you're saying opt your children out of the test, and I love that idea, but they're being taught to this test, and we're being taught to standards that are not going to help accomplish an education that we want for our children down the line. So opting out is just the beginning of something, but it's not going to get to the root of what we need to do.
So I mean, great question. I mean, the reality is you shouldn't have to file a lawsuit to have, whether it's your state legislature or whether it's your governor or whether it is the people in the U.S. Department of Education obey the law, right? I mean, they actually have to take an oath to obey the laws, right, and uphold the Constitution. So you shouldn't have to do that. I mean, Pioneer where I work, we've commissioned the research from these high, quality lawyers. But we're generally not litigators, and I'm not an attorney, so I wouldn't pretend to be one, but what you need to have is someone with standing.
Plaintiff.
A plaintiff.
It needs to be a plaintiff. You cannot have a lawsuit.
In education without showing somebody who's been damaged. And until you can, and this is just beginning, we don't have a damaged child yet to show. There may be in a few years, a lot of them, but the point is you've got to show a plaintiff to have a lawsuit.
In terms of the opt-out, I think the first and foremost you have to remember is that PARCC is not the state test yet. This year was a transition year where the commissioner gave districts the option of whether they want to pick PARCC or go with MCAS. And even though he's both the commissioner and one of the governing commissioners of PARCC, when there's obviously a conflict of interest there, only about half the districts in the state picked it. So that's not a huge ringing endorsement of either his leadership or PARCC. PARCC is lost. They started off with about 24 states, they're down to 12. So 12 states have gotten out. That's all sent out a big ringing endorsement of it. And in states like New Jersey and New York, which are both PARCC states, you're reading about it, there's hundreds of thousands of people that are opting out. But PARCC is not the state test. And so there's no consequence whatsoever of opting out of PARCC. MCAS is different because that is the state law and it's the state test. And so
High school diploma.
High school diploma is connected with that. But at this point, there's no consequence to opting out of PARCC whatsoever. And again, the real remedy is getting in touch with the governor's office and the Secretary of Education's office and the legislature saying you don't want to do this. That's the best way to end everything that you heard tonight. That's the fastest way. In the meantime, opting out is a remedy that you have that, as Sandy says, sort of sabotages the numbers that they need in order to make these tests valid.
It's also very easy to do, and it's being done across the country. It's just that you're not aware of what's happening unless you have media reporting. But if you Google opt-out, starting from California, you're going to find waves of articles on opting out. It's civil disobedience in a way, and that's good old New England concept.
Gentlemen in the back.
Hang on a second, just 1 second, sir. You can come up. Stop Common Core Forum, Stop Common Core, Massachusetts has forums on their page. So I would expect if you weren't already a member, I hope you'll join up right away, and we can just download the form right from our list of documents that we have on the website there. You don't even have to come up with your own. You can print one out and fill in the info.
So let me just give you this is the phone number for the governor's office. It's 617-725-4000. And then you can call Mitch Chester, who's the Commissioner of Education. I'm not sure you're not going to reach him, but that's 781-338-3102.
You're not going to reach
Thank you.
So, Paul Unberg with Gloucester City Council, and Henry, thank you for recognizing Greg tonight. Yes, we are very interested, and that's why we're here. To other speakers, please come up and use the microphone, because when you don't, there's this wicked echo. And our sound system has echoing, baffling software, so we couldn't hear you, for instance, even though you were loud. I have a question for Jamie. Jamie, you referenced in your comments we and the Pioneer Institute. Could you tell the audience who the Pioneer Institute is and what your mission is, so they don't understand your context here tonight?
Yeah, so Pioneer Institute is an independent, nonpartisan think tank. Been around for about 20 years or so. We were one of the big drivers in a lot of the education reform efforts in the 1990s. Whether it's the previous standards, MCAS, charter schools, teacher testing, and funding. We've been one of the big national, probably the biggest, in conjunction with work we've done with Sandy, probably the biggest national critics of Common Core. Tom Birmingham, who was one of the chief architects of Common Core, again, pretty well-known figure in K-12 education, former Senate president, he's a senior fellow at Pioneer. But it's an independent, nonpartisan think tank. We accept no government money. 3/4 of our funding comes from individual private donors, so it gives us a lot of independence. There's no deep-pocketed foundation that's paying for us to oppose Common Core. This is all part and parcel of the work that we've really done in the last 10 years, but even longer, advocating for K-12 education reform in Massachusetts. And a lot of what we've done really in the last 10 years is advocating for the things that we know the data, the facts, and the evidence have proven to be successful in Massachusetts. Is that helpful? Do you see some comments?
I'd love to hear from some parents.
Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Jason Grove, as Jim pointed out. I have to say, looking around the room here, I can only, the word that comes to my mind is strange bedfellows. Because there is a very interesting mix of people in here, and even at this table, Jamie, you and I were very vocal about the charter school. It's very amusing to hear Dr. Stotsky's reference to the wizard behind the curtain with the PARCC test. Those of us who battled the charter school felt the same way when that was approved by the Board of Education. And at that time, there was a lot of wizardry behind the curtain. And maybe that's something that we ought to look at from the Board of Education standpoint. But my question tonight is really, what's the end game, okay? We want to get rid of PARCC tests. That seems to be the idea here tonight. Where do we go from there? Do we go back to the concept of MCAS? And if we do, are we looking at MCAS? I've got a real issue with standardized testing in general, largely because the best thing that standardized testing has proved is where you live. Your zip code has more to do with your performance on MCAS than just about any other factor. Okay.
This is very important, and some of the ballot questions have talked about going back to the previous pre-2010 standards. So that's part of what they want to clarify for the question that what do you do if you get rid of Common Core? You have to have standards. Now, you're still under No Child Left Behind, and I don't want to go into the weeds about the reauthorization of ESEA that's taking place as we speak right now in Congress. It may change the whole picture, but No Child Left Behind introduced testing from 3 to 8 plus high school. During the Clinton administration, 94, there was a reauthorization of ESEA, which is what No Child Left Behind was, and they introduced at that time only one test per educational level. That was the testing framework, one in elementary, middle, and high school. No Child Left Behind pushed the envelope as far as they could go, which was from 3 to 8 every single year, plus high school, and then add science. The Obama administration was trying to push it even more by having K1 and 2 added on computers until enough people in states said, sorry, we don't want to spend that much time teaching kindergarten kids how to manipulate a mouse and a computer. It was a little bit too much. It was not an appropriate use of instructional time, which is what, and as well as the arts and the other things that would have to be given up in order to do that. So we've got this expanded testing framework, but the tests are there in many people's eyes. They were in Massachusetts for accountability. If you want the state to have a funding formula and to give money to each town or city to help equalize how much money it has available for underprivileged kids or whatever you want to say they are, but to have relieve cities or towns that don't have the same property value as other places. That was what the funding formula was supposed to be for. And so in order to give that money, they wanted to be able to say, we need to have something to show for it. And it wasn't just student tests, MCAS, it was also teacher tests. That was part of the accountability. We are going to fund our ed schools and our teacher training institutions, which we do for the most part, all of our teachers' colleges. Then the teachers who pass, the respective teachers should pass a licensure test, which is what I ended up working on. So it's accountability that's driving the test. So you don't want to give up all tests. This is part of the problem that people are facing in this country. There isn't any country in the world that doesn't have at least one standardized test, even if it's for high school or matriculation for college. So you've got to have some tests in there somewhere, maybe not every year, because I don't think annual testing is good or useful.
So let me follow up if I could. First off, I will agree with the Chapter 70 formula that we have in the state is fundamentally broken. It has been broken really from day one.
Broken in what sense?
It doesn't account for issues like what we have in Gloucester of special education needs. When it pays special education 3.5% and we have 25%, the amount of money that we have spending on special education is not brought in by the state level. It's atrocious.
I'm not saying the funding formula is perfect, but that was
So what is the penalty for us should we decide as a community or as a state to opt out of PARCC? Because we ran the risk of losing Title I funding with No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. What's the penalty that we face? And we're talking about getting rid of something.
And this is what
what's the
state being rattled everywhere. Right now we don't know. This is the thing. Congress, when it appropriates money for Title I, that has to go to the states. It can't. The USDE can't withhold it by law. So that money has to go to the states. State legislature money, the funding formula, has to go to the towns or cities according to the formula. Again, the Department of Ed can't hold that up. What are other penalties? Every state has been threatening, we will withhold high school diploma, or we won't give your high school accreditation. None of these are in the statute, and each state is playing games through its State Department of Ed. We don't know of any penalties. The bluffs have to be called because it isn't clear that there could be any real penalties or money withheld unless an administrative fee from the USED for the Race to the Top money, as I think Jamie mentioned, has already been spent. It was only for 4 years. It ended, last year. So that money you can't force that to be returned. It's already been spent. There may be new money, and we don't know what Arnie Duncan is trying to do when he says he wants to do something about the opt-outs. What can he do? We don't know.
So, I mean, Jason raised a variety of questions. I mean, from my point of view, under Ed Reform in 1993, we actually had the testing probably about right. They were testing, third grade reading, fourth grade math, fifth grade reading, etc. They were alternating subjects by year, and it was really under No Child Left Behind, as Sandy mentioned, that they, which was crafted by George W. Bush and Ted Kennedy, which I was never in favor of. I thought No Child Left Behind. And the truth is, a lot of the federal record in K-12 education is very poor, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat advocating for it, and it ends up being incredibly ineffective, and it ends up just growing more bureaucracy, sort of dumped on schools. But one of the things that No Child Left Behind did was that it basically mandated annual testing in every subject, grades 3 through 8, which really exploded testing, not just in Massachusetts from what we had previously under Ed Reform, but across the country. And I think that really has driven a lot of the anti-testing. I think with the opt-outs you're seeing now, it's actually the tip of the iceberg. I think it's true in red states and blue states, places like Texas and Indiana, which are traditionally sort of, kind of more Republican states. There's a huge anti-testing blowback that's going on. And I think that you're going to just see more of this, because the fact is that it's not only that there's more testing, but from my point of view, because there's going to be a test. Whether it's the MCAS or PARCC, there will be a test because No Child Left Behind mandates it's going to be a test. The big thing is whether we're going to control it or not. And people say, oh, well, under PARCC, we've got a seat at the table. We're in a testing consortium with, Washington, D.C. New Mexico and Arkansas. But under MCAS, whatever its weaknesses are, we own the table. We make all the decisions. The Board of Ed, the Commissioner of Ed, the legislature, the governor, our elected officials who represent us, irrespective of their party, had control over that test. And it was made right up over the border in New Hampshire, so it was something that we had a lot of authority over. It was a state contract. That's not the case with PARCC. PARCC is run and dictated by Washington, D.C. by a chief exec who in 20-some years actually has no experience developing tests before. And if any decisions around it will be made in concert with New Mexico and Arkansas. Folks, these are very low-performance states. The expectations that they are going to have, and frankly there are more lower-performing states in the PARCC consortium than there are states like Massachusetts, it doesn't bode well for us. We are going to have a lot less freedom and autonomy to make adjustments to the test if we want to make adjustments to the test. If PARCC gets locked in, all bets are off. The fact of it is that no one governor or state legislator or legislative leader or board of ed will be able to get to it at that point. It'll be totally out of your control. So it's true, there are a lot of strange bedfellows. We've done a lot of work with Diane Ravitch. She's pretty vocally anti-testing. Others mentioned that Barbara Mataloni, who's the head of the MTA, is anti-testing. The reality of it is the only way to correct this is to make sure we don't adopt PARCC and then have the Board of Education return back to the pre-2010 standards. Otherwise, it's totally out of everybody's control.
Questions? Yes,
We have about 14 minutes or so left, so make sure you have your questions in mind.
I am Italian, I talk a lot, but I will keep it short. My name is Amanda Kesterson. I have 3 sons, and my oldest is in 3rd grade in Rockport Elementary School. And I opted him out of the PARCC test in March, and I opted him out again for this week because they're doing another round of testing. And I didn't opt him out because he couldn't do it, because he was actually kind of jazzed about it. They made like a big deal and got him all excited, but because I don't like the lack of transparency that occurred during this test. So I wrote to the principal and the superintendent, and I said, I'm opting my son out. And they were everyone's been very nice. Any parent who's thinking about doing it, I just want to assure you that the schools and the teacher actually wrote me right back right away. No problem at all. Put him in a separate room with a teacher. They gave him some reading. It was great. He was totally fine and not feeling ostracized at all. Perfectly fine in March, and I'm sure that'll be the same this week. But my question to you is, I wrote to the superintendent and I said, you guys sent out a letter informing parents of all the important things we should do to get our children ready for PARCC testing, like getting them a good night's sleep and feeding them breakfast. But it didn't mention that we have the legal right to opt them out. It's not a mandatory test. Why didn't you mention that? And he wrote me back and he said, well, from my perspective, it is mandatory. You do have the right to opt him out, but it's a mandatory test. And so my question to you all is, given that perspective from our superintendents, our principals, our school committees, as parents, I didn't respond to him. I didn't know what to say. How can you possibly say it's mandatory if the law says, no, it's not? You have the right to opt out. So what do we say and what do we do now?
Actually, the problem is that from his perspective, he's more right than wrong. The schools must offer the test for MCAS, and they've been told to offer PARCC from the Department of Ed and the Board of Ed so far. So he has no choice, if he's going to follow the statute, to have the school, the Rockport schools, offer the test. And he's not required by statute to say, parents, you have the right to opt your kids out. You have to know that, and it's your school committee that really has the responsibility. They're elected, and they still have pretty much the same legal responsibility that they've always had, 400 years. They are legally elected. Remember, your superintendent is a professional person hired by them. He only runs the schools as they decide, even if they handed it over to him and have got a relationship backwards, which is what's happening in a lot of places. So you shouldn't put your teachers, I always say, don't put your teachers on the spot. They're following orders and they don't want to risk their jobs. It's your school committee that should be listening to you and making sure parents are told that it is their right. They don't need to ask for it. They've got it. They don't have to have a vote by the school committee to say we're allowing parents to opt out. You've already got it by virtue.
Opt out and then address the school committee.
They can address the punishment or the instructional session. They can say to the superintendent, we want to be sure that the kid isn't put in a closet or sent out to the playground, that they're given teaching of some kind. That is the school committee's responsibility, and they need to be reminded of that. The superintendent will follow in theory, follow their orders, because that's where it comes from. Next question.
Hi, my name is Ann Strong, and I have 2 third graders at West Parish in Gloucester. And I know you mentioned the website, and that was very helpful, but my question is, did you know that there's a website called Opt Out KBAN?
Yes.
Yes, and on it there's information on opting out of the park, which is an act of civil disobedience. It is required by statute, but it is an act of civil disobedience to opt out, and one that many people should take advantage of. And we really don't want anyone in our government allowing us, enacting in statute, the ability for us to opt out of the test. Why should we allow the government to tell us what forms our protests may take?
Well, that's right, but there isn't any statute that says that you do not have the right to opt out.
No, there's nothing that says there's...
So it's not statutory based. That's what you have to remember. They will tell you that, but it's not the case. That the statute requires you to send your child to school to take the test.
No, it makes the test mandatory, but you don't have to subject your child to it. They have to offer the test. But anyway, so you do know that there's a website called Opt Out KBAN, and on it there are ways to email your state legislators. So all the addresses are there.
I'm Michael Curcio from Gloucester. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm Cindy's husband. I want to say thank you to the speakers and presenters who provided a wide range of information and discussed a lot of issues surrounding this whole question. I was most struck by a statement that I think I heard from Dr. Stotsky. I'd like to ask whether I got it right. What I heard you say was that the Common Core standards don't meet the admission requirements of most community colleges. Did I hear that correctly?
Right, and that is because the college readiness test, which is scheduled for grade 11, according to mathematicians, it's easier, as I say in math, to look at the topics that are there. It doesn't require a full Algebra 2 course, a set of course topics, which most community colleges throughout the country have required. And that's why that statement has been made by people in California in particular. But the community college requirements are pretty similar across the country. In reading, we can't tell until you know more about the passage level and where the cut score is. But in math, it's very clear that a traditional Algebra 2 course is required for admission to a community college.
I found that to be the most telling thing that I heard here tonight. What I would suggest, because that statement is so brief, it is so clear, and I think for many parents, it will create a very visceral reaction on behalf of their children. I would suggest that as you go out and present, that you make this the rallying cry.
In 2009, they basically killed off U.S. history in Massachusetts. There was going to be a U.S. history on gas test. We have standards that say they worked on, which are routinely ranked as among the best standards in the country. So those have been brushed aside. I mean, just think about it. less literature and poetry and drama, and really no requirement for history in Massachusetts. That's not college ready in any way, shape, or form. And on the math side, it's not even just the opinions of Pioneer Institute or Sandy or more importantly, an accomplished mathematician like Jim Milton. It's the people who wrote the standards themselves. This is from Jason Zimba. You can do a Google search. So Jason Zimba, Massachusetts Board of Ed. It was a 2-minute exchange he had with Dr. Stotsky. And this is what he said. He's the lead architect of the Common Core math. He said Common Core math, they prepare students, quote, for the colleges most kids go to, but not for the colleges most parents aspire to. And he added that the standards are, quote, not for selective colleges, end quote. That's the architect of it. This is Bill McCallum, who is also one of the architects of the Common Core math. He said this in 2010. Quote, the overall standards would not be too high, certainly not in comparison to other nations, including East Asia, where math education excels, end quote. And then the other big advocate for the Common Core math is a guy named Stephen Wilson. He was quoted in the Baltimore Sun saying that Common Core math standards are, quote, vastly better than most states. They are, quote, nowhere near as good as the top states, end quote. Massachusetts is the top state. This isn't from the critics. This is from the people that are the advocates and that wrote it. These are not nearly college or career readiness standards, and by their own admission.
Thank you.
We are practically out of time. Are there any last questions?
Just have one more statement.
Okay.
This is. My daughter just graduated 2 days ago from the University of Kentucky. She was educated here in Kentucky, and the one thing I'll remember about a constitutional law professor from this semester, in his syllabus, he said specifically that he was going to be correcting for grammar. Does anybody know if grammar is taught anymore? I can tell you right now. My daughter was told she could not end her sentences in prepositional phrases. Thank goodness I spent time with her doing editing sessions and helped with those things. Because I know for a fact that I learned in my education at Waltham High School and prior to Waltham High School in 7th grade, I had grammar. I do not know that my daughter has ever had a grammar class specifically. So I just want to end with that because that's why we're going to lose the race.
It's very important, thank you. It's very important to remember that the Latin root of the word education means to lead out of, to draw out of, as if from a well. It doesn't mean to thrust into the head of a young child. We are robbing them of what makes them human. That chance to reflect, that depth of humanity and imagination. They're going to have issues when they inherit this world that we can't even conceive, just like we're dealing with things that our parents couldn't conceive. We need to prepare them to have imagination. We need to be preparing them to meet the world on their terms, that they're going to be creative. You know, I taught in Waldorf schools for a very long time. They didn't introduce testing at all until 6th grade. And even then, it was the state standardized test. And it was optional, and it was stated that it was optional. But most parents opted for it because they wanted to find out where their children stacked up next to their contemporary public educated kids. The curriculum was not teaching to the test, they had no prep whatsoever. Across the board, for over 10 years that I was involved in that school, 6th through 8th grade, they scored in the 80th percentile and up. And it's because it was a classical education, just like Dr. Stotsky was talking about. The power is in your hands, in our hands, as parents, as educators, and community leaders. We're the ones who are setting the stage and handing an inheritance to these children. Be empowered. You always have been, Dorothy. You've always had the power. Right? Thank you, Mr. Gass, Dr. Stotsky, everyone else in the please go off and stuff up. And And if you have any questions, there's plenty of information out there. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.